Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this video, I am going to be talking about chapter 2 of the book Islamic Science and Making of the European Renaissance by George Saliba. And this chapter is the continuation of the previous chapter. And in that one, we talked about the classical narrative, the problems with the classical narrative, and the questions the classical narrative cannot answer. And in this chapter, we are going to be looking at an alternative narrative posed by the author. So let's start. The alternative narrative. Objective of the alternative narrative: liberating historical sources. Critiquing the classical narrative aims to free historical and scientific sources from entrenched biases. Constructing a new narrative. Build a narrative that better explains the history of scientific disciplines with a focus on astronomy as a representative field. Expand this narrative to other disciplines to create a holistic view of Islamic scientific achievements. Rationale for using astronomy as a template. Queen of sciences. Astronomy was regarded as preeminent in almost every culture. Continuous progress. Astronomy experienced steady growth from early Islamic times through the 16th century and beyond. Potential applicability. A robust narrative for astronomy may serve as a framework to examine other scientific disciplines. The role of historical sources. Relevance of early theorists. Early theorists provide foundational insights for constructing the alternative narrative. However, sources explicitly theorizing about the beginnings of scientific activity are scarce. Focus on Al-Nadim. Al-Nadim's biography. Abu al-Faraj Muhammad bin Abi Yaqub Ishaq al-Nadim, known as Al-Nadim or Al-Barraq, means the bookseller, is the key figure in this chapter. Work. His comprehensive book Al-Fahrist, completed in 987 to 988 CE, surveys intellectual production across early Islam. Significance of seventh treatise, devoted to ancient sciences and contains accounts of philosophers, scientific origins, and key works. Implication. Al-Nadim's narrative of early scientific activity offers a foundational but undeveloped version of the alternative narrative. So we are going to be looking at that one. The historical account of the rise of science in early Islamic times according to Al-Nadim. Al-Nadim's contribution in Al-Fahrist. Role as an intellectual historian. He focused on the transmission of knowledge through anecdotes, hikayat, providing insights into how ancient sources were integrated into Islamic culture. Focus on the seventh treatise, dedicated to the ancient sciences, exploring their transmission into the Arabic Islamic context via historical narratives. The first two stories, reliance on professional accounts. He sourced the stories from experts in ancient sciences. However, he did not critique the potential biases in these narratives. The story from Kitab al-Nahmatan, written by Abu Sa'al al-Fadl bin Nawbakh, an astrologer linked to the Abbasid court and son of Nawbakh, who created Baghdad's horoscope under Al-Mansur, which we talked about in the previous chapter. And this is the first story we are going to be talking about, the story of Abu Sahal bin Nawbakh. Obviously, I'm not going to be narrating the whole story here, but I'm just going to be talking about the intentions of Al-Nadim behind mentioning the story of Abu Sahal bin Nawbakh, the role of Babylonia and Persia in the origins of science. The narrative establishes Babylonia as the origin of scientific and astrological knowledge, connecting it to Persia and framing these civilizations as pivotal in global intellectual history. By emphasizing the influence of Babylonian sciences on Egyptians, Indians, and Greeks, the story highlights the universality and antiquity of knowledge stemming from these regions. Astrology as a legitimate discipline. Astrology is presented as an ancient and authoritative discipline integral to understanding human and cosmic affairs. The inclusion of celestial mechanics and zodiacal signs underscores astrology's integration into both scientific and philosophical discourse in the Abbasid era. Persian culture pride and Shu'ubiyya movement. The story aligns with the Shu'ubiyya movement, which sought to assert Persian culture's superiority over Arab dominance. By crediting Persian rulers like Ardashid and Shapur with preserving and reviving sciences, the narrative glorifies Persia's role in intellectual history, asserting its legacy as foundational to Islamic civilization. Legends as cultural narratives. Legendary figures like Hermes and events such as the Alexander the Great's supposed destruction of Persian sciences serve as mythic frameworks to communicate broader cultural truths. These elements function as a creation story for Persian and Babylonian scientific heritage, blending historical fact with cultural myth. Al-Nadim's use of the story. Al-Nadim's inclusion of the anecdote reflects his effort to provide a culturally resonant narrative that connects Babylonia's scientific legacy to the Abbasid project of intellectual synthesis. The story appeals particularly to the Abbasid Persian community, reinforcing their identity and contribution to Islamic thought. The second story, Abu Mashar's story. Al-Nadim's use of the story. The story illustrates the Persian king's dedication to preserving ancient sciences by using durable materials like the bark of the Tuz tree and selecting geologically stable locations like Isfahan for safeguarding knowledge. The account serves as a testament to the efforts of ancient civilizations in protecting intellectual legacies from natural disasters and the passage of time. Astrology role in science. The story highlights astrology as a driving force for scientific preservation, with astrologers like Abu Mashar depicted as intellectual guardians, predicting and preparing for climatic disasters. It emphasizes the importance of reliable astronomical data like mean motions of planets, which were foundational for astrological and astronomical studies. Purpose of the stories. Historical contextualization. He documents revealing narratives about the origins and preservation of sciences, blending myth with historical insight to offer a nuanced understanding of Islamic scientific heritage. Cultural synthesis. By linking Greek, Persian, and Islamic traditions, he showcases the diverse influences shaping Islamic science, preparing the reader for subsequent accounts of Greek contributions to this legacy. Skeptical reflection. collection. Al-Nadim's description of decayed and unreadable manuscripts hint at the limitations of such treasure hunt stories as reliable accounts of scientific transmission. The third story, philosophy and restricted access. In ancient times, the study of philosophy was restricted to those deemed suitable by astrological readings. This highlights a selective approach to philosophical education among the Greeks and the Romans. The rise of Christianity in Byzantium led to a suppression of philosophy, with books being burned or locked away as philosophical pursuits were conceived to contradict Christian doctrines. Julian and Shapur II. Julian, who briefly ruled the Byzantine Empire, allowed philosophy to flourish under his reign. However, his rule lasted only 2 years and his death marked the return of the philosophical suppression under Christian influence. The story intertwines historical and legendary accounts of Shapur II's interaction with Julian. It includes romanticized elements such as Julian's daughter aiding Shapur's escape and subsequent political and military events. Byzantium's scientific stagnation. Al-Nadim suggests that Byzantium's suppression of philosophy persisted into his own time, 10th century, with scientific texts being hoarded as treasures rather than actively studied or disseminated. This aligns with broader narrative of Byzantine Dark Ages and highlights the role of Syriac-speaking communities in maintaining and transmitting knowledge. The fourth story, Khalid bin Yazid bin Muawiyah as pioneer. He initiated the translation movement by commissioning Greek and Coptic alchemical works into Arabic, signifying deliberate knowledge acquisition. Translation of Persian Divan. Persian Divan transitioned to Arabic under Al-Hajjaj despite resistance from Persian officials. Syrian Divan converted from Greek to Arabic under Hisham bin Abdul Malik, streamlining governance in Arabic. Rejection of other origins of science. Al-Nadim refutes claims that Islamic science emerged through Byzantium or mystical preservation, attributing its growth to deliberate efforts by figures like Al-Ma'mun and Banu Musa. Contributions of Banu Musa brothers. The Banu Musa brothers are depicted as patrons of translators like Hunayn bin Ishaq and Sabit bin Qurra, fostering a robust culture of scientific translation and innovation. They funded extensive translation projects, highlighting the institutional support for intellectual endeavors. Al-Nadim's methodology and intent. He emphasizes human agency and socio-political drivers, particularly language and bureaucracy, in fostering knowledge transmission. His approach contrasts with the idea of a passive reception of science, presenting the Islamic scientific tradition as a proactive, institutionalized pursuit. And we have looked at the 4 stories mentioned by Al-Nadim, and now let's go for Al-Nadim's alternative narrative. Critique of classical narrative. Al-Nadim challenges the idea that Persian influence or Byzantine scholars were key to reviving Greek sciences, arguing his narrative was self-serving and inaccurate. Focus on translation activity. The translation movement began under Khalid bin Yazid in the Umayyad period, driven by practical needs like minting coins and administrative reforms. Divan and scientific knowledge. Al-Nadim redefines Divan as administrative offices requiring specialized knowledge, leading to the development of applied sciences like algebra. Administrative scientific link. Administrative tasks like taxation and infrastructure spurred the translation of scientific texts, fostering fields like algebra and engineering. Critique of Orientalist view. Al-Nadim rejects the science versus religion trope, attributing the growth of knowledge to practical needs, not ideological conflicts. Implication. Al-Nadim emphasizes that scientific development in Islam was driven by real-world challenges and administrative needs, offering a nuanced view of early Islamic science. The consequences of Divan translation. Arabization of Divan. The translation of Divan to Arabic displaced Persian and Greek-speaking bureaucrats, causing disenfranchisement and resistance. Emergence of competitive bureaucracies. Displaced communities sought influence through mastering advanced sciences, fueling the translation movement. Social impacts and Shu'ubiyya. Displacement led to tensions between Arab and non-Arab groups, manifesting in cultural prejudice and strife. Translation movement as a byproduct. Bureaucrats, not caliphs, drove the translation of Greek and Persian texts, with figures like Bakhtishu and Hunayn ibn Ishaq playing key roles. Science as a survival tool. Displaced communities used science to regain status and adapt to the evolving bureaucratic landscape, advancing Islamic intellectual tradition. Bureaucratic scientific nexus. Bureaucratic competition drove intellectual and scientific excellence, contributing to Abbasid Empire's golden age. And at the end, let's go for the conclusion. Reassessment of translation movement. The translation of Greek and Persian sciences was driven by the socio-economic reforms under Abdul Malik, prompting bureaucratic elites to seek advanced knowledge. So the Abbasid elites competed to advance science, revitalizing classical knowledge and fostering innovation. So the translation and scientific creation occurred simultaneously, with figures like Al-Hajjaj bin Mattar coining Arabic technical terms in his translation of Al-Magest. Role of bureaucrats and scientists. Bureaucrats, often also scientists, patronized and advanced science, aligning professional needs with intellectual growth. Critique of classical narrative. The classical view of the translation movement is critique, emphasizing socio-political factors over religious or racial explanations. Implication for Islamic science. The competitive environment led to the refinement of ancient sciences and the creation of new disciplines like algebra and astronomy. Call for a methodological shift. A return to primary sources is needed to understand the true trajectory of Islamic science, considering its socio-political context. And that is the end of this chapter. And in this one, we looked at alternative narrative, which is that the Divan translation into Arabic caused the competition between the bureaucrats, and they sought advanced sciences to secure their jobs. And in the next chapter, we are going to be looking at the Muslims' encounter with the Greek scientific tradition. That's going to be very interesting one. Stay tuned for that one.